Welcome to the Murphy, Sam, and Jodi After the Show podcast. We hang out a little bit longer. Love to hear from you.
Something we didn't mention in the show today, but it's a big deal, and I do want to do it here. I want to talk about it because Murphy is among the many.
Uh-oh.
Today is World Diabetes Day. It became an official day, I think, in the early 90s to draw attention to the millions of people who live with diabetes, but also not just because of the medical component and all the research and, you know, how hard it is to understand type 1, type 2, but they also, because so many people, a large number of people who are living with diabetes also experience anxiety and depression because of it. And I was reading that early today, you know, as sort of getting ready for 3 Things to Know and all of that. And I was like, oh, World Diabetes Day. And I started reading more about it. And I had a memory, Murphy, of something you said early on in your diagnosis. Not the funny stuff that you said, Sam. I knew you were going to.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of acceptance that has to go along with it.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing, because type 1 is what it is. It doesn't have a cure. You can't make it happen. You can't eat. It's not. You don't eat your way into it. It's not. It is completely genetic. It's about 4% of the diabetic population, like we talked about before. So early on, my denial came from the fact I was actually hoping I had type 2, which in a lot of cases can be treated by oral meds, or you can adjust your diet, or whatever. And that's, of course, not what it was at all.
No.
Now, I will tell you, it's been a blessing in disguise, I think, being type 1, because when you don't have a choice but to manage it, you manage it.
Right. And you might be healthier today for having been diagnosed with it.
Yeah, because I was smoking before, you know, onset hit me when I was 28, 29, something like that.
Smoking
yeah.
and...
I was smoking. To me, a balanced breakfast included 2 Pop-Tarts and a glass of chocolate.
A cigarette.
Yeah.
I remember that, too.
Right. So,
I remember that, too.
I'm a much healthier eater now, and I take better care of myself.
When you and I were becoming close back in those days, you were diagnosed. You got really sick. We didn't know what was wrong with you. I went with you to your first appointment, to the first time you ever gave yourself a shot. It was a very traumatic time for you in your life because, you know, you're being told this. No, you didn't do anything to cause it. Yes, it's happened to you. Yes, you're going to live with it for the rest of your life. I remember you asking the nurse, well, what is it that triggered it, that caused it to click on in my body? And she said, if we knew that, we might have a cure.
Right.
So I remember that being a bit, but something else that you said at home, at your house, not long after that, when you were in the days after your first shot and in the days after insulin being a part of your life, and that's before you were on a pump, you were injecting.
Yeah, I had to do it.
And all that.
They wanted me to do it for a year to respect what insulin does and how it works before it became automated.
Like manually.
Yeah.
I remember you walking through your living room, and I was sitting on the floor right at the coffee table. I don't know what I was doing, but you were walking through, and you were aggravated about something about it because you weren't feeling good, and you forgot to give your shot or something. And you said, I'm just ready for this to go away. And then you looked at me, and I looked at you, and nothing, because we both knew it's not going away.
Right.
You didn't say it. I knew not to say it. Well, guess what? You know?
Yeah, I've always wondered what was the point, or how long did it take for you to say,
accept?
Yeah. Like, I haven't been diagnosed, but like if I was diagnosed with it, would be like I would be thinking there's got to be a way, there's got to be something, or maybe. But at what point did you go, this is it? You know, I mean, did it take a week, or was it within the first couple of days?
It wasn't a week.
No, it wasn't in a week, because you're having to go through. I mean, you have to go through, and I don't remember the name of the process. What is it? The whole 5 steps.
The grieving and denial and all that.
Yeah,
anger.
Right. That's what you have to go through. Honestly, you have to get through the, anger. I don't know why I don't remember those 5 things, but I think it usually starts with anger, and then it becomes denial, and then whatever it is next, rationalization, bargaining, whatever it is, and acceptance.
Acceptance is last.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm sure that it took me months. I don't remember that part very well. I remember the moment I was told and being just shocked, especially when I was told that it's nothing that I can change or do. And then the reality of having to give that first shot. And, I mean, until that point, I was afraid of needles, but those needles they're small. You know, I mean, and once you've given yourself a shot, it's nothing. I mean, it really doesn't. You know, those needles are thin now anyway. They're better than they've ever been. But before that first time, I couldn't bring myself to do it. So that's when it became real.
Yeah, because you had to do it.
Yeah.
It's like you want to feel better. If you don't have type 1 diabetes, your body naturally disperses insulin when it needs it.
Right.
But you have to do it now. You have to be your pancreas. You have to do that work manually now. Now you do it with a pump, but you still have to dose it. It's something you can't get away from. And I'm sure there's a lot of, it's a difficult thing to accept because, you can't get away from it. You always have to think about it.
The second very significant moment for me was probably right before I was going on the pump. Or it might have been when I was actually, in transition learning to do the pump. And that same nurse, Deborah, she was awesome,
yes.
very instrumental in making sure that I got this, and understood how to handle it. But I was still smoking at that time, a year into, the diagnosis. And so she was talking about how when you maintain tight control as a type 1 diabetic, you're not likely to have any sort of complications. You really, it's not a guarantee. And some things are going to be, there are little things like healing takes me longer. It always has since I've been diagnosed and stuff like that. But the serious complications, as long as you manage it, then it's...
You're hopefully managing your likelihood of having...
Right. And
serious.
So she said, but the one thing that you're doing right now is smoking. So, you can keep doing this if you want to lose your feet, or you can stop. And when she said that, honestly, that got my attention at that moment. And I'd heard that before, but for whatever reason in that moment when she told me that, that got my attention. And you know what? And I quit. It was far harder for me to stop smoking than it was to quit drinking.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so
unbelievable, but yeah.
I know, because it was my thing. Jodi knows that. I always had one lit at all times. Now we're talking 25 years ago, but that was the reality of it. But yeah, the acceptance part, I mean, you really can't effectively manage it until you accept it. You're not because you don't think it's a problem, and until you realize it's a problem that you're going to have to face, and then you become comfortable with the fact that it's not going to go away. And both of you've seen that it still has its frustrating moments.
Oh, last night you were frustrated about it. I mean, it's a part of your life. You bring it. I mean, you have to carry it around. You do. You manage it.
Yeah.
And that means emotionally too.
Yeah.
And I think everybody in your life is understanding of that.
Yeah, it's ever present. And I think that even something you get used to that's ever present, it takes mental energy. And there are some days that you just don't. You would prefer not to have to deal with it at all. It would be wonderful. Every now and then when I'm changing my pump site out, because you change that every 3 days, it's a needle is what it is with a little bit of tubing. So you rotate it around, you move it, and every 3 days it gets changed. Every now and then when I'm changing it, because I disconnect from the pump when I hop in the shower, but the tubing and all that, I usually it stays attached until it's time for it to change. But there are some times where I will, before I change it out, I get into the shower and I've completely removed it. And for a minute, it's like, wow, okay, this is normal. This is, I almost pretend like for a moment that I don't have it.
Yeah.
And then when I get out, I've got to put a new needle in,
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
And see that, those thoughts, that's a mental weight you're carrying around that no one else sees and knows. That's another thing about diabetes. You can't see it. You can't look at a crowd of people and say diabetic. You can't. Type 1, type 2, you can't do it. So it is something you are managing, mentally on your own all the time. I know you talk to me about it a lot. You talk to us about it a lot, and that's fine. Yeah. But I was reading it when I started looking into it this morning. We've never talked about World Diabetes Day much. But I started looking into it this morning. Another reason they say specifically that so many with diabetes have that anxiety, have those mental struggles with it, is because they just feel overwhelmed. They get tired of worrying about their blood sugar. They get tired of chasing something they can't even see. Chasing something you can't even see.
Yeah.
And
like the technology's made it a lot better, but there's still. I have to remember to dose a certain amount, even though I'm wearing the smart pump and the G6 Dexcom, whatever thingy that, reads my blood sugar and all that. it's a lot better than having to prick my finger 20 times a day like I used to, and everything that I owned had blood on it. You know what I mean?
It did.
But, you know, I mean, I got used to that. And then you could always tell, I mean, it kind of, among us type ones, it's just a joke when you'd hold your hands out, you could see the, you know, the little marks from all the, you know, that. And
that
one of our
sound even.
Yeah, I know.
And just all the time.
But there's a lot that I'm grateful for. Honestly, I mean, I know I still have my moments of frustration with it, but there's plenty I'm grateful for. The healthy part, I'm really grateful for. I am by far more healthy right now than I was at that time. And if I go back in time, I really was eating Pop-Tarts for breakfast. And I didn't care what I was eating or how many calories. I never worried about that. Even though I had started gaining a little bit of weight, I'd always been pretty thin in my 20s. And so I never worried about what I ate. I didn't exercise. I smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day, and if I wanted to have a drink, I was going to have a drink. And so I'm sure those things would have really, maybe I wouldn't be sitting there right now, honestly, if I didn't. And so managing that and the importance of that, and Jodi and the girls coming along and me wanting to make sure that I take care of myself so that I'm around for my family and I want to be around for my friends and, of course, for myself too, have all been pluses from it. And so... And when you have other type 1 diabetics that you know who are insulin dependent, like our friend Jeremy, who our coworker here, it's really weird to be in a building where there are only 11 of us in this building, but 2 of us are type 1, you know. And so he completely relates. He and I, more than anybody, and as much as Jodi knows me better than anybody on the planet. And but when it comes to actually understanding because you live it, when he and I speak about it, you connect. Any type 1 diabetic that I've run into, I connect with for that reason. And you don't even really realize how much that support actually means. And the other thing is kids.
Oh my God, I was going to bring that up.
Yeah. This is why the technology is so good now. Between the smart pump and then the glucometers or whatever you want to call them, not glucometers, the Bluetooth that actually communicates with your phone or whatever to read blood sugar, like a Dexcom does.
Yeah.
The parents of a child who's in school can actually real-time monitor their blood sugar.
Oh.
There's so much now that's better about it. And recently, within the last 6-8 months, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, which was JDRF, just renamed themselves T1D Breakthrough. And the reason they type 1 diabetes breakthrough. And it's because what I have, type 1, used to be considered juvenile diabetes because it would usually show up 8,
early.
10 years old, 11, 12, or whatever. For whatever reason, in the last, 4 or 5 decades, it's become 12, 15. You still have a lot of young kids that'll wind up with it, but 12 and 15, mid-20s like me, and I've even heard of people in their 30s and 40s developing type 1. It's like, why now? What has changed
that's why they're studying
happens?
It.
Yeah, exactly.
They're constantly studying it.
And so that's why they had to rename all of that. So there's a whole lot of progress. And I guess if there's anything, I'm glad you brought this up, Jodi, because to me the most important thing is if there's only one other type 1 diabetic who's listening to this podcast right now, that they somehow know, okay, I'm not alone in this. It is manageable. Yes, it's frustrating. It's okay to be mad at it, but it's also okay to know that you can be 100% normal with your life, and even if it doesn't go away.
But also acknowledge that it does take a mental toll. Like just because other people can't see it or understand it, you're not crazy. There is a mental toll that it takes, and you and anyone listening to this, type 1 or 2, if you're worried about managing it and you're worried about what's going on in your bloodstream that you feel like you don't have any control over and you're trying to control it, you're not crazy.
Of course.
It's taking a mental toll, and you should seek help for it. It's anxiety. Anybody with any sort of diagnosis probably has an acceptance period. And to go back to the question that you asked him earlier, when did he accept it? Over years, I think.
Yeah.
And you don't have a date where, you know what? Okay, where you checked off that box. There was no date because it was you fought it for a while.
Yeah, I didn't even think about I'm glad you're bringing the mental health part up, because the first time I ever went to a counselor in my life for any reason
was because of that.
I had somebody recommend to me, and it turned out that my first counselor, she was also a type 1 diabetic.
Hey.
It was very coincidental, but she was, that I think made it even more impactful for me
Yeah.
When I had those
and nothing wrong with that. You
her.
needed that at
Yeah,
that time.
you're
You were
right.
actually very angry about the diagnosis.
I was very resentful of so many different things. You start to ask why me and all of that. It's going through that whole process. I hadn't really thought about that in a long time.
We've talked about it a lot over the years, even here on these podcasts, but we've never talked about the mental health of it. And I just wanted to do that because that's the reason that they bring World Diabetes Day. The CDC brought it in. Well, not, research and technology and all of that, medicine, but mental health. Yeah. You are carrying something around that no one else can see.
Yeah. And, and it's not just the thought of it and how to manage it that has its toll. It's the actual physical impact that when your blood sugar increases, it impacts other things in your body. I don't know if it's hormonal, but it certainly changes energy levels, the way you feel. It changes mood. It changes a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And those are things I had to learn to be aware of, too. 9 times out of 10, if I'm getting impatient or really aggravated or snap on something, almost every time, seriously, if I check my blood sugar, it has gone up suddenly and quickly. I mean, who knows why?
Oh, it has nothing to do with Jodi?
No. It doesn't.
Perfectly timed,
Sam.
Right,
right, exactly. But, in the same thing with the low blood sugar, which is pretty important to treat quickly, as Jodi can tell you, you start to feel scattered or uneasy or anxious or whatever. You have to learn to interpret all those things. And that sort of self-awareness, the physical self-awareness, I think is the kind of thing that you only learn by talking it through, especially with somebody that actually has it, but any counselor, who who can walk you through that process, I think makes a difference.
Acceptance.
Yeah.
Missed any part of the show? Get it all on the Murphy, Sam, and Jodi podcast.